So before any restoration takes place upon the film, it will go through a physical check, which will involve actually examining the original film elements that are going to be utilised for the restoration, looking for any problems that they may have that need to be corrected and fixed. It will then be ultrasonically cleaned before it moves on to the next stage, which would be the scanning process. So with the first step of restoring the scan, we utilise IR data from the scanning process, which effectively gives a defect map by shining an infrared beam through the film footage, the actual physical film, and that will give us a map of any dirt that's present on that actual element. The computer can then interpret that data and, targeting only those sections, fix those. So that would be a first pass that it would go through. We'd then move on to a semi-automated restoration pass, which would involve on sections that still need more restoration, or it may be an overall if the IR has not corrected enough of the defects. After that, we move on to secondary processes, which would be usually stabilisation, scratch fixing, that sort of stuff, and then manual dirt fixing. If the film is particularly unstable or warped element, you may well run stabilisation as part of your initial pass, the same with deflicker. If the density fluctuation is very bad on the film elements, you'd then run that before you did your final finishing work on that.
Exterminate all resistance! I fight them!
Both of these films were shot in the process called Techniscope, which was a process developed by Technicolor Italy as a lower cost alternative for making 235 CinemaScope films. CinemaScope is a 4-perf process that utilises an anamorphic lens that squeezes the wider image onto the 4 perforation area of, say, of a normal film. So you utilise the full 4-perf area that cameras have traditionally done for the last 100 years or so. A 2-perf basically uses half that amount of space, so it's a flat image, which allowed them to utilise spherical normal lenses. The disadvantage of this process was that effectively, because it's only 2 perforations rather than 4 perforations, there is effectively contains half the quality CinemaScope, so hence why it's not really used today as a process, or when films were predominantly still made on film.
For the Doctor Who and the Daleks, we thought was in a really good condition until we started scanning it 4K 16-bit. And then because of the resolution, we could see these fine scuff marks and scratches and a few other digs, which you can't see in HD and possibly in 2K. So we decided to wetgate it, which is quite a long process and very slow to do, which would fill in with fluid and diffuse the light and reflect the scratches, and they'd disappear. It's like magic, really. It's great. It's a really good process. One of the biggest problems we had, because it was 2-perf, is there's no frame bar. So each scene has an extra 2 frames at the front and the end. So when it was going through the wetgate, because it's a sealed unit with the film going into the fluid and out the other side, it was getting caught and it was causing bubbles to be drawn through the air jets. And this caused quite a big problem on the scanning. We'd have to keep stopping and picking up and adjusting the pressures to get the film to run on the wetgate. On an 18-minute reel, it was taking about 18 hours to scan. But it looks great. It looks like a new film. It's incredible what a wetgate can do. But it's very, very difficult to maintain it and to keep it running.
So on the second film, Dalek Invasion Earth, that one was nowhere near as tramlined. It had some small degrees of tramlining that tended to appear in the middle of the reels, and that's probably to do with the tensions on the film of whatever scratched them. So that one was certainly the one that was in better condition of the two. But there was one shot in that which was a dupe that had been cut in that was in very poor condition, so we've done our best to tie that one in with the rest of the first generation footage around it. We also did quite a bit of stabilised work on that one. Equally, the scenes at the beginning of the film and at the end of the film with the robbery taking place, it seems the emulsion on those sections is starting to degrade. So they actually had to be quite significantly deflickered to try and even that out.
When grading old films, I tend to research first before starting on the project, find old references or any kind of online interviews with people that worked on the film, just to get an idea and a feel for how it should look. And then we match up against a reference and go through shot by shot, sort of matching close to it. If we can improve it a bit in certain areas, then we do. And then once we've done shot to shot across the whole film, I go back and then look through the scenes and make sure the scenes flow naturally into each other. For Doctor Who, I used a reference of the previous release, which was graded just in SDR, not HDR. So we matched in SDR first and then moved that into an HDR colour space and just basically used the extra range to sort of bring out some of the really vivid colours.
Where is the machine?
In the petrified forest outside the city.
Good. We will examine it.
For the grade of Daleks Invasion, we used a previous release which was in SDR, and we matched that through the on the timeline, and then took that into an HDR colour space and made use of the wider colour gamut, which brings out the colours and also a slight increase in contrast, not too much, just enough to sort of give it a bit more of a bite. With the Technoscope Neg, it's 2perf, so you have a problem where if there's a bright light at the top of the picture, it bleeds through to the bottom of the frame. So you sort of get like a sort of raised area at the bottom or at the top, depending on where the bright light is. And it can also be a slightly different colour. So where possible, I put a shape on and just bring that down and take the colour out. Some of the shots you can't do that because it's moving across the sort of picture and moving across people, so you just get bright and dark sections. But where I can, I've tried to reduce it. In SDR, you're sort of constrained to a certain range. That means that if you have bright skies and then dark sort of sections on the picture, you're kind of having to squash that into a smaller range. Whereas with HDR, there's a lot more available sort of range in the light, so you can let the skies completely shine through and also have really dark sections of the picture. So basically it just gives you more control, and that also means you can add a bit more contrast. The other area in HDR is the colour gamut, and it's a wider space, so basically there's more steps in between each colour. It means the colours are more rounded and they have like a natural look to them.
So when these films were previously restored in HD, the interpositives were utilised and not the original negative. This was likely because of the aforementioned scratching, that the technology of the time or budgetary limitations may have meant it wasn't possible to go that route. So for the first time, what you're seeing is the first generation images, the original negative that was physically in the cameras on location when the films were originally made. This is the best they will likely ever look, and we'll get the most detail out of. You'll also be seeing a much more refined grain palette than the interpositives had, as when the interpositives were made, the second generation, and were blown up to 4perf, which will give you that detail loss as you got there. So this will also, the first generation material should really pop with the HDR grading, and it's the best basis for a HDR grade as once again, every time you duplicate something, that generational loss will not only be image quality, it will also be the amount of colour data you can get out of that scan.